Welcome to Alumni Stories, the podcast. My name is Peter Kennedy, and I am the Director of Alumni Affairs here at Monsignor Farrell High School, as well as a member of the class of 2012. Today marks the day of our first episode of Alumni Stories, the podcast. Perhaps you have seen our newsletter in your emails, but this one is a little bit different, and we're very excited to welcome in Kenneth White, a.k.a. Kenny White, a.k.a. Coach White, from the class of 1988, currently the head of strength and conditioning at Georgetown University Basketball. We had a great conversation talking to him about his time as a basketball player back at Farrell and the University of Vermont, all the way through his time coaching at St. Bonaventure, Columbia University, Stony Brook, Providence College, and now Georgetown University. Everything from preparing student athletes to NIL, to his playing days, to the impact that Monsignor Farrell had on him. A great conversation with Kenny White, the first of many alumni stories to be shared on this platform. So thank you for listening. I'm Peter Kennedy. Enjoy the show. And welcome into the first ever episode of Alumni Stories, the alumni newsletter brought to the podcast space, and we are very excited to bring in our first guest on Alumni Stories, the podcast, class of 1988, with a number of accolades that we will get into, including playing days at University of Vermont, coaching at Providence College, and now the current head strength coach of Georgetown Basketball, Mr. Kenneth White, class of 88. Welcome to the show.
Thanks, Pete. That's pretty neat to be invited. To the fact that someone wants to listen to me. I graduated 37 years ago next month. So it's pretty neat. In any way I can help my alma mater and give back to Amboy Road. And I'm just honored to be asked and be fortunate to feel like I have something to contribute.
And it's an honor for me sitting here as the Director of Alumni Affairs, getting to do this show with you. It's really cool because you're somebody who I've heard a lot of stories about from when I was a student here, hearing about some of your playing days and what you were doing in the coaching ranks, at the high Division I level. Being a student athlete myself back at my times at Farrell, we heard a lot of stories. And then working here, a lot of people have great memories of that 1987, 1988 basketball season, and we'll get into a bunch of that stuff. So thank you for being on here. But basically where I want to start, and we'll start a little bit more current, and then we'll kind of circle our way back. But you're at Georgetown now this is season number 3 coming up for you at Georgetown?
Yes, I just actually passed 24 months, pretty much exactly 2 years ago is my start date. Yeah, we're going on to our 3rd season coming up.
And that's now your 4th, I think, official stop in Division I athletics here at the college level. From Stony Brook to St. Bonaventure to a 20-year career at Providence College, now at Georgetown. Do you feel settled in yet is my question at Georgetown. Do you feel like you got the full flow, like you got everything the way you want it to roll?
Yeah, I would call it home now. I'll always be a New Yorker, always be a Staten Islander, but yeah, I'm a DC, I'm a Hoya now. Once you take a job, that's where your feet are. You can only live in one place. So once I made the decision to come here, I'm not really one to necessarily look back, other than maybe to learn from a previous experience. But yeah, I don't count. But I think it's my 6th university.
Is that including where you played or just coached?
Yeah, University of Vermont, and then I was actually a basketball coach at New York University, and then I went to graduate school at Columbia University, and then St. Bonaventure, Stony Brook, and then Providence College, and now Georgetown. So a few Catholic schools peppered in there, and now at a Jesuit university. So it's pretty neat.
Yeah.
And in 1957, my father graduated from Georgetown.
Oh, wow. Awesome. A great full circle moment, I'm sure, for
yeah, it's
you.
Pretty neat. It's pretty
hearing
neat.
Stories about Georgetown growing up, I'm sure, and obviously a storied school, not just academically, but athletically as well. So now I want to bring us back a little bit to the Monsignor Farrell days and talk about kind of where your path has led you, because it's interesting on so many accounts, right? Because you were a great athlete here at Monsignor Farrell. I know you're a very humble man as well, but it is important to note that you had some great accolades that we'll get into on the basketball court, on the track, and then obviously in college as well. But this career path that you've led has brought you to all across the country, seeing top-tier athletes across the world, and you've done amazing things with those athletes in your own right. But I want to ask you the question, when did strength coach become a thought in your head? Obviously, athletics were such a big part of your life, I'm sure, throughout the high school and college years. But when did this career path become a reality, and kind of how did you get yourself to understanding that this could be, a full-time career?
When I was a high school student and even into college, strength and conditioning was a very early on profession. It was in its infancy. Now you can actually get a major and undergraduate degree in strength and conditioning. So it's evolved from an academic and a degree and thus a career standpoint. I went to a Division I athletic program that didn't have a strength and conditioning coach. But I was always relatively fit. That was always an angle for me to compete, was to be maybe a little bit fitter than my opponent. So I always was interested in fitness and training and conditioning and exercise, and to now actually get paid for it and to work in a gym with collegiate athletes and to go to work in sneakers, shorts, and an athletic top and work on a college campus for a decent amount for a career has been pretty neat. But it's just sports. I have 3 siblings, and I think all 3 of their jobs probably have more value, social value, than what I do as a college coach. My oldest brother is a middle school teacher, so I think that's incredibly important to educate the youth. My sister on Staten Island, she's the last Staten Islander in the White family, works in a nursing home with elderly people who really need her. And my brother, he went to Regis High School, he's the smartest of the bunch, he's a medical doctor.
Wow.
And then my godson is class of 2016, Monsignor Farrell. He is just going to enter the fire department, FDNY Academy. So those jobs have a lot more social value, but we put so much weight on athletics and sports that mine might have even some more prestige in many people's eyes, because I work with a Division I basketball team that plays on television and has produced professional athletes. And sports is it's the front porch of universities, but it's also really become the front porch of our country. Sports and the influence of athletes, and it has significance because so many people have an interest in it. But its real value is some could be overweight and overmeasured.
It's interesting, though, because you talk about the social impact, and I think the argument could be made that, what you're doing with your programs and with your student athletes has a different social impact, but still a great social impact nonetheless, because, I'm sure you can attest to this back to your Farrell days and your college playing days, that the coaches that you work with are some of the people who do give you some of those valuable life lessons, and the world of sports itself, being surrounded by it, does give you so much to learn about regarding the real world of whatever industry you go into, and how to interact with people on a team, how to, strive for greatness, not just in your athleticism or your athletics career, but in the career path that you choose. So what type of lessons do you draw from, outside of being actually holding the basketball or holding up weights and doing exercises? What do you draw from a team perspective that translates to your career as well?
Well, I'm a helper, and that's part of being a team. Everyone has a role. And my role within our team here is to prepare our athletes to compete against another college's athletes. So I'm supporting our head basketball coach and our coaches to try to develop our athletes physically to compete. So I'm a helper, and that's what I tell our guys, is that I'm like Home Depot. You can do it, I can help. And everyone has a role, and every role is important. Every job has significance. So I take what I do seriously, but I may not take myself seriously. I do take it. It is vital to the mission of our program, is to be fit, to be healthy, to be durable, to be prepared. Basically, my job is preparation. So,
right, you work in the off season to be prepared for the regular season, and then obviously all the ongoing training that you're doing to stay ready, to stay healthy, and that's really, I'm sure, what has changed a ton. So that's what I want to kind of get into next. All the way back to your playing days, you mentioned that strength coaches were hardly even a recognized function of the process, right? Like there wasn't a major that existed yet for your college. I'm sure there is now. So when did that start to click with you, that this training aspect of it all and the science behind it, and you're not just a coach who's telling people to pick things up and put them down, but learning how to move their body properly, how to recover properly. When did the science of it all really become, a passion of yours, and how you create programs for different athletes?
Well, my first job out of college, I was working at the Downtown Athletic Club, which actually no longer exists because it closed its doors after September 11th, because it was down in Lower Manhattan. And I worked in the fitness center. Basically worked in the gym there, helping to train people, and then I knew I needed to get more educated. Just because I worked out and enjoyed it, that didn't mean I necessarily knew what I was doing. So then I had to get book smart. I was a history major in college and a political science major because I thought I was going to be a high school coach and a high school teacher, and I thought I was going to go that route, whether it was back at Farrell or another high school. I'm the son of a high school teacher, the son of a high school coach. So I thought I was going to go that direction. Then I enjoyed working in the gym, enjoyed working with people, enjoyed exercise as a lifestyle, and to share that and spread it. And I knew I had to go get educated. And then from the Downtown Athletic Club, I went uptown to the New York Athletic Club on Central Park South and kept learning. And that was more private fitness. So that's more, maybe you're training someone individually for a personal goal. New York City Marathon, training them for the beach, whatever their motivation is. In team sports, we're training to compete, and that's kind of what I'm wired to do. That's what I did my whole life, is let's practice all week and let's play on Friday night. And all these years later, I still get to do that. And now there's just more people in the stands, and it's watched by more people, but it's really no different than Monsignor Farrell playing St. Peter's. Or two Catholic schools down here in the D.C. area, lacing them up and competing, boys or girls. But I knew I needed to get educated, and I was fortunate. So much of life is timing, being in the right spot, and then taking advantage of that opportunity. And luckily, I applied for a job out of the newspaper. A position at Columbia University was in the actual newspaper for a graduate assistantship. And to assist the head strength coach, who really primarily did football at Columbia, and it was to assist getting some of the other sports into the weight room. Because in the 90s, it started to become more mainstream for sports outside of football. Because the history of strength and conditioning is really football and then track and field. The athletes that throw the weights, the shot put, the discus, the strongman type track athletes. And football is really where the weight room became more of a staple in college and even high school. The only guys who really lifted at Farrell when I was in high school were the football players. And then it became a little bit more accepted for the skill sports to pump some iron and then to get fit and agility. And there's so much more than just weight training. And then I was fortunate to get a job at Columbia and getting an education and it's like an apprenticeship. Right. I was in the weight room, they took care of my tuition, and I put some hours in the weight room and learned. And then I was just fortunate to there were openings and jobs, and you apply for them. And I tell my athletes every day, you're auditioning. You are auditioning every day. You never know who's watching, who's evaluating, who's assessing you. So when that opportunity comes, you're prepared. Abraham Lincoln. I'm here in D.C. I see Abraham Lincoln, the Lincoln Memorial, almost daily on my walks, and he said, I will prepare and my chance will come. Someday my chance will come. I will prepare.
And it's a great message for anybody, right? In any part of the team, whether you're the number one scorer on a basketball team or, the seventh or eighth guy in the rotation, you have to prepare like you're going to play, because you don't know when that number's getting called. And I'm sure that you've seen crazy stories on both ends, right? Where someone gets that call finally to step into the rotation, and they were working hard all off season. They do prepare like they're going to play every day, and that hard work does pay off. But I do want to touch quickly on the opportunistic portion that you kind of mentioned there, because the way that you kind of moved throughout from Columbia, then on to St. Bonaventure, then to Stony Brook. How did those things come about? Did it become a networking thing when you're working at Columbia as a grad assistant and learning? Were you consciously thinking of what you were going to be able to do next, what coaches you can kind of like latch on to become a mentor for you, and how that's going to help you kind of carve your own path in your career?
Yeah, a little bit of luck, right? You need some luck. Luck is the residue of design, Branch Rickey said, the general manager of the Brooklyn Dodgers. So you kind of create your own breaks and your own luck, I'd like to think, by working hard. Another thing I always tell our athletes, our guys, if you're always ready, you never have to get ready. If you're just ready, coach is going to see, our head coach is going to see that, and when that opportunity comes, whatever it is, whatever that role might be, you're ready for it because you've prepared. So when I was an assistant at Columbia as an apprentice, I was training and preparing to have my own program somewhere, and it just happened to be that St. Bonaventure was starting their program, so I was lucky to be their very first strength coach. And then when I went to Stony Brook, they were going from Division III to Division I. They never had a strength coach. I was their very first strength coach. So starting a program is something I enjoyed and was lucky to get that opportunity, something that maybe not an experienced strength coach would do. So I was kind of starting really on the entry level and climbing up, and I don't know if I would even get the grad assistantship today because I was a history major, and I applied for physiology at Columbia. And the head strength and conditioning coach gave me a chance. But now people already have the undergraduate degree in it, and they might be able to leapfrog my resume because I had none of that really on my resume. I just had student athlete, and I was willing to work, and somebody gave me a chance. But yeah, if you're always ready, you just got to be ready to go. So when that chance comes, any job, big or small, Pete, do it right or not at all. And that's something I learned from my father, who 1964 he started teaching at Monsignor Farrell, my father.
Wow.
And every job's important, every role's important, and try to capitalize on those opportunities. If I had to give advice to the students there now, just be ready and be open-minded, be coachable, be willing to learn, and be willing to maybe make a mistake along the way. But I was lucky that people gave me a chance. It gave me an opportunity. And then when this job here at Georgetown opened 2 years ago, our head basketball coach at Providence accepted the job here. And he called me, and he said, it's time, because I had been at Providence for 20 years. And I said, Coach, it's Georgetown. Let's go. And also just a new challenge. I think sometimes you need a new challenge to keep yourself sharp. I kind of relearned, at a different school, different facility, different weight room, different athletes. So it's like a fresh start almost. So be ready, and then also look for new opportunities and go for it.
Yeah, it sounds like a combination of being ready and being open, and those two things kind of go hand in hand, because you can't really be open without being mentally and physically prepared for the next challenge. And you coached a number of NBA players through your times at Providence, and now at Georgetown it's only a matter of time probably before another one ends up that direction. So you've worked with all these different athletes, and that's not to mention all the other sports that you've had your hand in across your career. So reading about the two schools that you were the first ever strength coach at, St. Bonaventure and Stony Brook, and then at Providence for 20 years, not just being super affiliated with the basketball program, but operating as basically a manager for all the strength programs for all sports. What is it like for you kind of creating packages, I guess would be the word for it, for all these different sports that have different disciplines and different needs and different muscles that they need to focus in on? What is that approach like for you when it comes to creating, training programs for vastly different athletes and, male and female?
Well, all athletes need to be able to move and be in relatively good physical condition. So I keep it pretty general in the beginning, no different than maybe a basic physical education class. Teach them how to jump rope and skip and hop and shuffle and move, and just basic movements and body weight movements as push-ups, pull-ups, chin-ups. And then you progress, and whether it's a field hockey player, a volleyball player, a basketball player now, as I just focus on men's basketball, is you watch them play. You watch them move. You study the sport. But sometimes we get too specific too early. Let me just get them physically fit and strong, and then working in speed, and then really the last part is to get specific. But just really try to get them as fit as possible, get them durable. Mobility, durability, agility, they all go to flexibility, all those little pieces. That's what I said earlier about it eventually went beyond the weight room. You just be in the weight room, and now there's so much more to it, and between the mobility and the movement, and then there's a recovery part. So you just try to cover a little bit of everything. I want to have well-developed athletes from head to toe, front to back. Being able to do a lot of things, being versatile, to do a little bit of a lot. And then that helps them prepare for their sport. Because sports are pretty much unpredictable. You got to be ready for different movements and different positions. But you watch them play and you get to know them. And I think that's the biggest part of it, and the hardest part, and the most fun part is what motivates. How can I reach different athletes? Pushing different people's buttons. Everyone is different. So that's the best part of coaching, is how do I reach them, and then how do I keep improving them the longer I have them. There's an old saying: if you want to teach Johnny Latin, you got to know Latin and you got to know Johnny. Well, that second part is the hardest part and the most rewarding part of coaching. And it's a challenging part, getting to know them. What makes that person tick. What might motivate you might get someone mad at me. So it's really, it's not what you know, Pete, it's what you can transmit. That's teaching. That's coaching. That's any type of profession. It's not what you know, it's what you can get across.
Right, because if you have the best knowledge of lifting in the country, but you don't know how to communicate to the players, it's going to be less productive than somebody who might know less, right? Yeah, it's very simple. But what you just brought up two very interesting parts of it to me. And the first thing I'm going to go to, and this goes to our current students who are student athletes, and probably a lot of our alumni who are parents of young student athletes as well. You talked about versatility. You talked about the basics of being athletic and versatile. From your professional experience and your personal experience, how do you look at young athletes, all the way from grammar school and then through high school, being multidisciplinary athletes? Do you think it's important for them to play more than one sport? And where do you see that focus, or when do you see that focus becoming important maybe on one specific sport?
Well, the research has proven why there has tended to be a drop in participation in sports at the younger levels. And the research has proven about 11, 12, 13 years of age, the number one reason is it tends to be less fun. And because somewhere along the line they've been either taught or convinced that they need to specialize or pick a sport. And sometimes it could be a little too young for that, and it could lead to a little bit overuse and a little bit of staleness. And then I see it on the little bit further down the line is sometimes it could lead to overuse where the body is older than they are because they played one particular sport repeatedly over and over and over. But on the other side, many of these sports are high-level skill sports. The best of the best, whether it's tennis or basketball, have had that tennis racket in their hand for many, many hours, or the basketball in their hand, or the soccer ball on their foot for many, many hours. So now as I train older athletes who have a lot more miles in their body, I try to find the gaps that maybe their sport might have missed and develop to make them a little more balanced. But I do think maybe it's too young of an age where we make them select a sport. And I hate to say, well, when I played, some of the best athletes I could think of professionally and at my level at Farrell played multiple sports. Some of the best athletes to ever play at Monsignor Farrell played multiple sports. And some of the best athletes in American history played multiple sports.
Right.
Maybe there's a freshness to it, and maybe there's some carryover that helps those athletes. Now it tends to be, Peter, so much of sports, even at the youth levels, are profit-driven. The adults have gotten heavily involved in their kids' participation. I can rarely remember my parents being at a game, let alone a practice. Now you see these youth practices aligned with parents, and they're paying an adult to maybe teach them at a young age as opposed to maybe a little bit more free play and just playing. So you got to find that balance. I do think they need instruction in fundamentals and safety, but sometimes when there's constant competition, Peter, where it's just endless travel ball and endless competition, sometimes they need to just play. So in my profession, I get them a little bit older. Where can I find those gaps that maybe their sport has missed to make them a little more balanced? I don't want to condemn youth sports or youth coaches or travel ball, but it's just different. And my travel ball was a subway token. Get on the ferry boat, get on the subway, go travel in the 5 boroughs. That was my travel ball. Not going halfway across the country to play 2 games and your mom and dad go broke doing it. It's just different.
Yeah, and you think about some of the athletes who get brought up as the greatest athletes on the planet or greatest athletes of all time. You instantly think of a Bo Jackson, right? Who he wasn't the best running back of all time. He wasn't the best baseball player of all time. But because he was so skilled and so physically gifted at both, people put him in that conversation. And the same goes for someone who stands out to me as an Anthony Edwards. Anthony Edwards could have played college football. He chose basketball, but you can tell that that athleticism that he has is so natural because of he was always the type of young person who would pick something up. I'm going to try this. I'm going to try to be great at it. And that kind of brings me to another part of this where you were talking about coaching and how you have to be able to translate what you want to get through differently to each student athlete. What have you now learned over your career from the athletes, and how much do you have to learn constantly because the athletes you trained in 2003 are different than the ones you trained in 2023? Of course, there's similarities, but the world is changing. So as a coach, how much are you learning from your actual team and your student athletes?
Well, the expectations may be different from 20 years ago, or the pressures, or it's obviously that's 20 years ago was pre-social media. Right. So maybe there's more pressure on them. But human physiology hasn't changed in 50,000 years. So the physiology part of training and the demands on the body are similar from an adaptation point of view. If I put you through a workout, your body's going to adapt at the cellular level. Certain things going on that are not going to change because the body itself hasn't changed. But the demands of competition and sport and outside influences. So, like I said earlier, you just got to get to know your athlete. And sometimes you have to back off. Tommy Lasorda, a great baseball manager for the Brooklyn Dodgers, said, "Contented cows give better milk." So, not that it's all hunky-dory, but if I beat them down, if I'm really up their backs, am I getting the best out of them? So just recognizing that hey, there's a lot of pressure on these athletes at this level. And just being aware of that. I don't necessarily if the training is different. There's obviously new equipment and new technology that comes out, but they know with me, I keep it pretty simple and consistent, and have a plan. If there's teachers on here, or parents, or coaches, have a plan, but understand you may have to adjust and adapt it. My philosophy is plan your work, work your plan. The Navy SEALs will say, plan your dive, dive your plan. So I keep it really simple, but try to find the fun in the work. And if you have the right group and the right atmosphere with an objective or a mission or a goal, it can be fun. But if it's just solely sets and reps as X's and O's, and that's the best part of team sports, is the camaraderie of it. And we're all going, hopefully you get enough people where you're all going one way. Pete Carroll, longtime football coach, said, be yourself, but be a team. The best thing about sports is right on this team here, Peter, I have guys on this team from 4 different continents.
Wow.
And different states and different experiences. That's really hard to get outside of sports. The people you meet in your huddle are different. And it's really the last meritocracy in our country, where it's my team against your team. Doesn't matter if you're from Toad Hill or Park Hill. Doesn't matter what religion, what's in your bank account. Doesn't matter whom you date, what pronoun you use. Sports, you produce within the lines. And it's really apolitical. It's production and it's teamwork. But I think I learned a lot more in a huddle, in a locker room, than in many classrooms, because some of those lessons endure. That's why when earlier when I said I really don't want to talk necessarily about my own personal career at Farrell, but more some of the teamwork and lessons that go beyond a scrapbook. Right? Trophies get tarnished, but not the lessons from the coaches, some of whom are still at Farrell. Some of the lessons I impart on my athletes were my coaches.
Yeah, and you're doing my job for me, because I was about to segue. You're talking about the atmosphere and the place where you're learning and all the moving parts that go into creating chemistry on a team. And I wanted to circle back to your time at Farrell. So thank you for the handoff of a segue right there to talk about kind of some of the things that you remember from your time here at Monsignor Farrell, whether it be in the classroom, in the cafeteria, on the practice court, during the games, the whole nine. What stands out to you that you still feel very present to this day from your experience here at Farrell? And I'll let this kind of be open-ended so you can take it wherever you want.
Well, Farrell had standards. It was a history of producing competitive teams, and I knew the names of the Farrell athletes before I even enrolled in Farrell. The track and the football. And when I was a freshman at Farrell, the best athlete in the school was a cross-country runner. He was a high school All-American who wound up coming here to Georgetown, wow. Neil Donahue. There was just a culture of overall good athletes. And, when you're a CYO, 6th, 7th, 8th grade, certain high schools on Staten Island, okay, I want to go there and play, or I want to go there, or I want to play against that team, or I want to play the night before Thanksgiving against St. Peter's or against Newdorp. When you're 15 years old, you're playing a varsity game on a Friday night. That's like playing on Broadway. Or you're in the Catholic high school playoffs at Mount St. Michael. And you're playing Tallentine or Cardinal Hayes. That's like playing on Broadway. So it's at that time in your life, it's really, really important. But I just remember there was some standards of, hey, this is Farrell. This is how we train. This is how we practice. This is how we compete. And you got to earn your keep. I had to earn my keep. I was a reserve on the freshman team. It took me a while to get a spot on the varsity. I ran cross country. I tried to just enjoy the time, but knowing that there's people ahead of me and I got to try to earn my keep. But it really is, some of my best memories are watching the other athletes compete, because Farrell had some serious athletes. They won the Metro Bowl when I was a junior, the number one football team in the city.
Yeah, the 1986 Metro Bowl.
Yeah, and we had some city champions in track and cross country and swimming. So just, it was a good atmosphere. And I just wanted to contribute and maybe beat St. Peter's on the other side of Staten Island. But when you're 14 or 15.
I know your senior year, because I got your yearbook right here. 16-2, number one in Staten Island, if I'm not mistaken. So pretty good job there on the varsity level, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, but the last game on Staten Island, I lost. Oh. And you're haunted by your losses and your shortcomings. Yeah. And we lost to St. Peter's, and anytime I bump into those guys, I say, I want a rematch. Give me 32 more minutes, because I'm in pretty good shape right now. I'm ready to go. So give me 32 more minutes. So you're haunted by sometimes your failures. My college coach said if you fail to give your best effort, it'll haunt you the rest of your life. And I tell that to our guys. All I want is all you got. All I want is your best effort, whatever that is that day. The saddest thing in life is wasted talent. The Bronx Tale,
right.
Classic movie. The saddest thing in life is wasted talent. And that's, I think, what I learned at Farrell. Let's go give it what we got and compete. And really, my best memories are the locker rooms and the huddles and the trips. It's not really the games. But I am haunted by the losses, not what somebody else might say as the successes.
Yeah, I think that's something that a lot of athletes would, really sympathize with, is those losses that stand out, that, you agonize for years about one play or one decision or one missed opportunity, and those sit with you, but they do inspire you, especially moving forward into your career. And before we move on to more stuff, I do want to ask you if there was any one person or two people or two coaches or teachers, et cetera, who do kind of stand out in your memory and inspiration moving on throughout your college career and beyond. Was there any inspirations from your time here that really, kind of stay with you to this day?
Monsignor Bergin. No, I'm not at Farrell if it wasn't for Monsignor Bergin. I was going to go to a different high school, and partly was the cost.
Right.
And he gave, he told my parents we're going to help him with tuition so I can enroll there. My oldest brother went to LaSalle Academy on the Lower East Side of Manhattan, because my dad was a teacher there and a coach and an athletic director. And then my other brother went to Regis, which is free tuition. And then my sister went to public school. So no one, there was no tuition paid for in our family, and my dad was a school teacher. So there wasn't, it wasn't pockets full of cash. So Father Bergin helped me out, helped my family, and I've never really said that till this point, because Yeah, it was something that was unspoken. And it wasn't an athletic scholarship, because I was an average athlete. I was an average athlete at my start of my Farrell career. I was an average CYO ball player. He was just trying to help my dad out for a life of service. And he was always support, and Monsignor Bergin, he may not come off as the warmest person. He could be gruff. But I was at his 50th anniversary of his ordination as a Catholic priest, and he said, I'll be at your ball games. I'll be at your christenings. I'll be at your kids' weddings. So he was always present. He wasn't necessarily a pat on the back guy, but he was always there with support. And there's a lot of people at Farrell like that. I mean, I could rattle off my teachers now. You remember the really, really good teachers and coaches, you remember the bums.
Yeah.
But there's a slew of teachers that taught me that are still there at Farrell, including my coach. And probably my favorite teacher at Farrell, I have so many, my favorite teacher was a Georgetown graduate, Mr. George Kochman, my American history teacher.
Wow. Yeah, I didn't realize he was a Georgetown guy as well.
Georgetown grad. He ran here and his son ran here.
Wow.
And I took his class, and then Mr. Manganell was an American history, government, civics, political science. And I took their classes and was able to get advanced placement credits that helped me at college.
Wow.
But really, I think of Farrell, I think of Monsignor Bergin. And there's lots of other people, and then my senior year homeroom teacher was Father Whalen, who now is a bishop.
Bishop
right?
Whalen,
Bishop. Yeah. And I just always said I had bad timing because I only had him for 1 year. If I would have had, I still call him Father Whalen, and he's really Father Bergin. He was a Monsignor, and I know Father Whalen, he was probably voting for the Pope the other day. But he was a freshman, he was a senior homeroom teacher for me. So I remember those people that took the time, and I'm just trying to help.
Right.
I said it earlier. I'm like Home Depot. I'm just trying to help. You can do it. And the
the
motto at Georgetown, the Jesuit motto, the Jesuit mission. I did not go to a Jesuit school, but I went to Our Lady Queen of Peace. I'm Monsignor Farrell, and worked at St. Bonaventure, worked at Providence, all Catholic schools. The motto for Georgetown is men for others, which in the 21st century, I think they've amended it to people for others. And that's all I try to do is just help. And I think of the older I've gotten, can I help more and more? Especially the older I've gotten. By behavior I've seen modeled by people such as Monsignor Bergin and someone like my father who taught for essentially 40 years. And those types of people, can I help? Can I give back, especially as I get older?
Right. And, that's the mission of Monsignor Farrell to this day. It's living a life of service for God and for a community. That's what it's all about. It's for doing what you can and using your God-given abilities to the best of your ability and to serve others and to take care of your family and friends and to be there for one another. And that goes to the career as well. So it makes a ton of sense. And getting to know Monsignor Bergin a little later in his life, was really unique for me because he wasn't here when I was a student here. So getting to know him and hearing those slight little jabs that he would still kind of fit in because he was very quick with the wit, but then also you can tell that he just cared deeply about people being their best and this place continuing to be its best. And one of the unique parts of my job is getting students who are current students who pop into my office as the alumni guy, and they see yearbooks from 1965 all the way to 2024 now, soon to be 2025, and they flip through and they see that Mr. Besignano was a basketball coach because they didn't even know that, right? And they're learning the history in real time of the lives of Kenny Whites and Lou Tobaccos and all the alumni out there. And it's really unique to see them for the first time notice some of these people who have had a hand in the history of Monsignor Farrell, like Coach Bez you just mentioned before, who, if these guys never looked at a yearbook or asked the question, they would be like, yeah, he must have just been a dean for a long time, right? No, he was the basketball coach, 2 different stints, and did some great stuff with it. So it's really cool to kind of see that history unfold, and for you to share your story is really cool as well. So I have a few more questions for you, Ken. You got a few more minutes?
Sure. One thing just to kind of build on that, and I try to impart that on the athletes, not to live in the past, but President Truman said, the only new thing in the world is the history you don't know. So it helps if you know your past a little bit and know who came before. And I use that as inspiration. Here there's a great tradition of basketball for many, many years. The very first Final Four team at Georgetown was in the 1940s. The coach was a Staten Islander. The captain was a Staten Islander. The star of the team was a Staten Islander. But there's a great tradition. We're not looking too much in the past, but the only new thing in the world is the history you don't know. And so many college coaches, guys like myself, we all have a scrapbook. And I'm just trying to help the athletes now get their own scrapbook. So can I take some lessons, experiences, and move it, into 2025? But,
yeah, no, it's a great way to put it too, because it's like that balance, and so much of life is balance, not just physically, when you're in the weight room trying to get the right balance of strength and effort and energy, but in your approach to life, it's pulling the positive from the past, learning from the failures, and obviously pushing it towards the future in the best way you can. So it's a great way to put it. That I never heard that before. The history you don't know is the future. So that's very, very cool to hear.
Harry Truman. He's the last president to be elected with just a high school degree, no college degree, Truman.
Wow.
Well, there's hope for maybe some of those Farrell students that high school's enough education in the classroom, but you can be educated outside the classroom or take up a trade. But he was the last president to the World War II veteran, high school degree, and then got into local politics.
Wow.
Yes. I'm a history major, Peter.
Yeah,
so I try to impart that to my students. It's a great honor. Like when a guy this semester said, "Coach, I learned more in this weight room than I did in the Georgetown classroom." I said, "Well, at least you have free tuition, because I wouldn't want to pay full freight and hear that."
Now, are you a quote of the day guy? Are you a guy who has kind of like a quote of the day or something like that? That you're imparting specific wisdom, or is it more just what comes to you, and when the time is right, you'll hit him with the real quote?
Yeah, well, the teacher will appear when the student is willing. Coach John Wooden said that. The teacher will appear. When they're willing, I show up. But the quotes are in here. I tell my guys are tatted in ink. My ink and my tattoos are inside. And then I bring them out. I share them.
Oh, that's good.
Well, you mentioned a little bit about maybe discussing some name, image, likeness, college sports, different last name now. That's where some of the NIL money goes. It goes to some local tattoo shops in the Washington, D.C. area.
Well, actually, let's get into that, because then we'll wrap up in a few minutes after that. But I do want to ask your opinion on that. You have been in college athletic space, and, we hardly mentioned your playing days at the University of Vermont, 4-year player there, led the league in assist-to-turnover ratio. I can go through the stats, 11 points, 5 assists as a freshman, but you don't want to talk about that. But I had to throw it in there.
You listening to this, Diana? You listening?
Yeah, right? I
know
you want to talk about it, but I had to give you the shout-out.
He's helping me out with this. But everyone has a scrapbook, Pete. Everyone has a scrapbook. We get a little bit older with age. Luckily, none of that's on social media. But Casey Stengel, the baseball manager for the Yankees, said you could look it up.
Exactly.
You could look it up.
You could look it up, and I did. And I saw some of those impressive accolades. So I need to give the shout-out to the people listening right now on Alumni Stories.
Thank you.
But other than the playing days, right? So now you move from being an athlete yourself, you start coaching, you're working with all sorts of athletes. You have worked with now, correct me if I'm wrong, I think based on my research, at least 2 NBA lottery picks, or one was right on the fringe of the lottery pick, Ryan Gomes, and you had Chris Dunn from Providence. You had other players drafted, getting undrafted contracts in the NBA. Now you're working in a world of college athletics where many athletes are being paid for name, image, and likeness, which has become a hot topic in the world of sports, and obviously a hot topic amongst young people who are trying to attain, those NIL contracts or whatever you want to call them. So what have you kind of grasped so far? Because this is early in the NIL process, in the story of NIL over the next, 10, 20, 40 years. It's early, but a lot is happening. So what are you seeing from your position and how it's affecting, athletes in, athletes out, and the whole process around recruiting and the big picture?
Well, any of those athletes you mentioned, whether it's a lottery pick or an Olympian, professional hockey players in different sports, I've been fortunate just to be there when they decide to select the school that I just happen to work at. They would have made that without me. The lottery, I'll never take credit for that. I'm just happen to be there. And they just happen to be on the team, but I would never take credit for a guy in the NBA, or we have some female athletes playing professional soccer and different athletes I've worked with, but they would get all the credit for that. Maybe I would just happen to help a little. Well, when I was in college in the 80s, you were not even allowed, if you were on a full scholarship, you were not allowed to have a job. So any income I made was in the summer. So I couldn't even necessarily work in the dining hall or work in the library checking IDs or the fitness center, because the perception was that schools would have abused that, and they would have paid the star quarterback excessive money to to work on campus. There would have been an abuse there. So we were not allowed to make a penny. But yet I had classmates that were music majors and played the drums and sing, and then they would go downtown and make lots of money and singing, performing at the bars and the clubs. And they were allowed to use their talent to make side income. Or someone is really bright and can tutor in math and make a little side income. And that's really where the name, image, likeness, believe that was the intention.
Right.
To utilize your ability, your name, hey, I'm a quarterback for UCLA, to utilize that to make some income. But it's evolved, at least at the high major sports, the ones that are visible on television. It's evolved, to pay to play or pay to enroll. But really it started in the legislation of the state of California, right, around 2019,
Yep.
that they passed a law that student athletes can utilize their name, their uniform, and maybe even to appear at someone's birthday party as a guest, make a little side income, basically side business. And it was the right climate for it because of most of these athletes have some type of presence on social media. So they can advertise, they can kind of promote themselves, but it became a recruiting tool where schools outbid each other for athletes. And I believe it's outgrown its intention. But keep in mind, the athletes in my era couldn't make a dime.
Right.
And that probably isn't right either. I was not allowed to have a job. So we had really no spending money unless we earned it in the off season. And that's hard to work during the school year too, when you're trying to do your schoolwork and play your sport. But even just a campus job would have helped. But now so many athletes earn excessive amounts for really doing zero.
Right.
So it probably has to be legislated in some way. But now your athletes employees of the university? Are they the same as a professor? Are they unionized? It's outside of any discussion. I just think that the higher ups, including our legislatures, really don't have the answer because, like you said, it happens so fast.
Right.
But I do believe a student.
Oh, go ahead.
I do believe a student should have the right to earn an income as other students would, using their skills, their abilities, their talents. Once again, that student that's been playing the piano for many, many years is now giving lessons. Why can't an athlete put up a post and say, basketball shooting, tennis lessons, golf lessons? It's outgrown its intention at the televised, higher profile sports.
Right. And I think
that can leave a bitter taste in fans' mouths and even employees' mouths when there's students who walk in the door and they quadruple your salary and quintuple your salary, and it doesn't come up in the day-to-day operations, but you see the movement of rosters at the high level of collegiate sports. And it's really beyond the market value of some of these individuals. But once again, any comment I'm really making, it's my personal opinion from reading and being in the world, but it's not necessarily an opinion of Georgetown. I'm just making my own Joe Blow opinion that carries no real weight. But there's got to be a balance from making no money to now just having your pocketbook filled just because you can dunk or shoot or do a slap shot or throw a spiral. It's.
And I think what I think is super interesting that I think about a lot too is that term name, image, and likeness. And I think what you said was so poignant was that this has gone beyond the scope of what it was intended for. I think a great example is YouTube, right? Because we're talking about the social media world and the young student athletes being active on social media with followings that if they weren't college athletes, they could make X amount of money. There was a kicker in college football who had a trick shot page on his YouTube. He had a lot of subscribers. He was going to be able to make a lot of money from this page through sponsorships and et cetera. When he became a NCAA Division I athlete, he had to shut his page down. And to me, that was where, like, okay, what is the real purpose behind this? So if this kid wasn't on the football team, he could have this YouTube page and make thousands of dollars. Now he's on the team, he can't. That's why name, image, and likeness came in. But now what it's become has been like a contract. So do they get a salary cap built into it at some point? Do they get a limits on how much they're able to spend per person? And these things become very tricky, and I'm sure it creates, different sorts of tensions and question marks for staffs that you work with, people who, when you're recruiting, oh, this guy's getting this from this school and that from that school. And I'm sure it creates some chaos, especially with the transfer portal becoming more prevalent in college athletics as well.
Well, I think a shift is, in talking to a lot of colleagues, I mean, when students would make a recruiting trip, you might hear about what they want to major or study. And that's, very rarely is that even part of a conversation when you meet a recruit. Hey, what do you want to study? Doesn't even almost come into the factor. And
Right.
when you're all winning, so it tends to be where many athletes come on recruiting trips with agents and advisors and adults that may want a little bit as pocket change. I'm in the business of trying to develop athletes to compete and really train to win. It's not just the won and loss record, but there is a scoreboard. So we're training athletes to win, to compete. And has that been lost a little bit because it's more side income or even more than just side income? And maybe if I'm not playing as much or if this coach is giving me a hard time, I can leave and go to another school and kind of start that cycle over again. Or if I have a great season, I want to get paid more. So it's a combination now of endless transfers in collegiate sports and money. That's what makes that tough combination. I was talking to our head coach today. I had a ball player that was 203 pounds when he enrolled, and he transfers out at 230. 230 pounds, he's a strong young man. But another school's getting a more finished product. He's like getting all our work. It's just the nature of where it's gone. But my era, you would think twice about transferring because you had to sit out a year. You had to sit out a year from competitive playing. So you might think twice about leaving. Now you can leave and there's really no repercussion because the general student can transfer from school to school and doesn't really have any kind of punitive aspect to it. But most general students that do not play a sport are probably not going to 4 schools in 4 years. They might change their major. I want to go to that school because they have a nursing program. I want to go to that school, it's closer to home. But they're probably not doing a new school every September. So you have that combination that makes it tough.
Yeah.
I spoke to our coach today about that.
Okay.
When you have athletes that you may only get now for 2 or 4 semesters, it's even more important to enjoy the company of your colleagues with whom you work.
Yeah.
Whether they're on the staff with me or within the overall department at Georgetown. I got to enjoy my colleagues because I know they're going to be with me. An athlete, you may develop and get a bond, but then they leave in 10 months. So it's different. I'm not trying to condemn it. It's different.
And I think it's important to remember that these things all change constantly. The one and done in basketball was never a super normal thing. It was the players were staying for 2, 3, 4 years, then going to the NBA. Then all of a sudden, kids from high school were going straight to the NBA. Then they changed that rule. Then you got one and done. So it's always going to be, a slight variation of the past iteration. So it's interesting to see where they are at now and where they're going to be in the next couple of years. But I do want to circle back. We're going to end up in just a moment here. I do want to ask you about the game of basketball at large, because I know you're in the strength coaching world and training world, but basketball is one of your first loves, and you're obviously hand in hand with the basketball team. And I want to ask you a certain question in this specific way. People talk about the boom of the three-pointer, but through my research, I heard that they called you White Lightning, King of the Three, in high school here at Farrell. So you were shooting three-pointers way back in the 80s, and now this three-point boom, that's old news to you, I'm assuming.
Well, I think a lot of ball players shot from deep range, but they all were worth 2 points.
Right.
So a 20-footer or a layup, they all were the same 2 points. So that's why many years ago you had more dominant inside players. And you get it under the basket, and it's 2 points. Count it. Chalk it up.
Right.
My senior year at Farrell, the summer of my senior year in 1987, the New York State High School Athletic Association voted to put a line on the court, boys and girls, to give an extra point if you made that shot. And it was not a very long shot, but it was something that happened later in my career. So now obviously these athletes at three-point line, they're born with the lines already there. I always talk about the gals I used to play with in the playground. They changed the size of the ball in the middle of their career. There was one basketball in the 80s. just a basketball. Then it became a men's ball and a women's ball. So think of that. In the middle of your career, they changed the size of they changed the equipment.
That's throwing you off, yeah.
So my senior year was 1 year with the line. So it wasn't so much a focal point of the offense yet. I wouldn't call it a trick shot, but it's helped a lot of athletes in basketball get a role in college. It's helped a lot of young kids get scholarships because now you become a specialist. Back then you had to do a little bit of everything. So it was fun, it was neat to have a 3-point line, but it wasn't something you trained for, because right before the school year started, you come back to high school at Farrell and there was a line on the court. So it was something that kind of came into my career. I was a junior in high school when the NCAA used the 3-point line for the first time.
Oh, wow. So they changed that pretty quickly, though. I didn't realize that your senior year was the first year.
Yeah, because I would have 2,000 points, Pete. Forget about it. Forget about it. That was a layup.
Yeah.
It was a layup. And we lost some games because the other teams could shoot too. But going back to kind of a one and done, and I don't like to condemn it, because no one condemns the 15-year-old tennis player that's pro.
Correct.
Or the 18-year-old that goes right to single, double, triple A, that goes to minor league baseball. But this one and done has a stigma. He should go to college. He should stay in college. The reason it's different from when I played is there were less NBA teams. When I was in school, there was no Miami Heat, no Orlando Magic. There was no teams in Canada, the Hornets. There were less teams, so there were less spots. And there was no G League. So there were just less opportunities to develop in almost like a farm system. When I was a senior in high school, it was the first year that professionals were allowed to play in the Olympics. It was called the Dream Team.
Oh, yeah.
Look at that roster and see how many guys stayed 4 years. The greatest player in the history of Georgetown was Patrick Ewing, 4-year student athlete. So many of them on that team were 4 years. Larry Bird. Michael Jordan was 3 years.
3 years, yeah.
We have above average college players now bouncing after one.
World, yeah.
Magic Johnson left after 2. He won a national championship. Guys who would win a national championship might leave early. Shaquille O'Neal, I tell our guys, Shaquille O'Neal did 3 years. Now, LSU might have been paying him a lot of money, pre-NIL.
Who's to say, right? Who's to say?
But, it was neat to be part of an era where all of a sudden they throw a 3-point line. So I'm a freshman in college, and we're playing at the San Diego Sports Arena, where the San Diego Clippers used to play. They're now in the LA Clippers. And it was the first gym I played in where there was an NBA line and a college line.
A college line, right.
So our college coach comes up to me, he goes, this line here is the same as the far line. He pointed out to me in the shoot-around, my college coach. He goes, that line's 3 points. Because I was firing away from NBA.
Right.
And, he said the college line's the same number of points. But it was a fun era to play. It was just, everyone says their era was better, but it was just a neat time to play. I'm glad I played without the crazy adult infused like travel ball, where every weekend you're traveling. You could stay in the playground and play 5-6 games or hours of games and get more shots and more reps than traveling to play 2 games, one on a Saturday, one on a Sunday, and your parents go broke because they got to stay in a hotel every weekend. I rarely can count the times my parents were at a game, and now you have the younger kids travel to these games alone, or they all get their own ride, and it just seems like it's a big financial strain because there's a profit side of it now. I'm just glad I just grew up in an era where your travel ball was to Cromwell Center or to the Berry Homes or to the other side of Staten Island, or I'm going to take the train into the city and play against the best players in the city. Because nobody really went to prep school. Nobody left the city to do a post-grad year, things I had never heard of until more recently. I'm just glad my era is when I played with really good teammates and good coaches, and I'm just trying to help this era without necessarily condemning it or judging it. Just trying to help them.
Of course, and that's what it comes down to, right? You said you're a helper, and you're trying to help these student athletes be better students by teaching them those life lessons, better athletes by the physical and mental training that you're helping put them through, and hopefully, great men and great women throughout the rest of their lives, because that's what it comes down to when you're coaching, and the luxury of being able to coach. You get to really feel that impact. And I know earlier on in this episode you talked about all your siblings and what they do, which is ranging from doctor to teacher and the way that they have the social impact. But I would like to think that your social impact is just as strong in its own way with all the student athletes that you work with. Now, to end up, since this is the first ever Alumni Stories, this will be the first time I ask this question, but this is going to be a trend across all the Alumni Stories podcast episodes. Again, Kenny White, Coach Ken White, thank you so much for doing this. My final question to you is going to be about the school motto, Vir Fidelis, the faithful man. I want you to finish off this episode by just telling me and telling the audience here, what does Vir Fidelis mean to you when you hear that school motto?
Faithful means that you're with you in the tough times and the bad times, a loyalty, a faithfulness to each other. Farrell made a commitment to me in 1984, and I'm faithful to Farrell back all these years later because what it has given me, lifelong friendships and lessons and teachers and coaches and Vir Fidelis. Both my parents were waked at Hanley's Funeral Home on Newdort Lane, and there was a lot of Farrell men at their wakes. And I think of really one of my fondest memories of Farrell was really one of the saddest, and it was the third Friday after our country's worst Tuesday. We had the mass for all we lost in 9/11, and my teammates and classmates, and there were about 19 guys that died in the World Trade Center attacks, and then how many more parents passed away. And that service, that mass they had, I still think about it. It's still very touching and moving in the Farrell gym. The only time I ever cried in a gym was that day, that evening, the mass that we had. And that's Vir Fidelis, just faithful to each other, even if you're not necessarily a religious person. Just the faith that Farrell had in me to give me a desk in 1984. I'm just trying to pay that back. It may not be with lots of donations and money, but so when Farrell called me, can you help us out? Once again, you mentioned the word an assist. I used to do assists in basketball. I pass to you, you score, they give me an assist. And I enjoyed that part, helping. Can I help someone who is 13, 14 years old now? Maybe they get inspired in some way. And that's Vir Fidelis to me, is faithful, loyalty, giving back. I learned, if I could, lots of lessons from my parents, but from my mom I learned there's no pockets on a casket. You can't take it with you. Give it. Maya Angelou said when you learn, teach, when you get, give. And I learned that from my parents. When you learn, teach it, share it, give it. So yeah, I might downplay the role of athletics, and it's just a game. Sometimes we overvalue the athletes in society because it's just a game. But I do take being called coach very seriously. No one has called me dad. I'm not a father. That sometimes saddens me a little bit that no one will ever call me dad, but thousands have called me coach. And I take that seriously. Lastly, because it is a Catholic school, but I lean more towards how you treat people. And once again, to wrap it up, because every day I walk by the Lincoln Memorial, and Abraham Lincoln said, when I do good, I feel good. When I do bad, I feel bad. That is my religion, Abraham Lincoln.
That's beautiful.
How you treat people.
Yeah, no, that was a beautiful answer. And to the future Alumni Stories podcast guest, a lot to follow up, because I'm going to ask that same question to everybody, and you did a beautiful job encapsulating what it meant to be a Vir Fidelis and be part of this. So again, Kenny White, thank you. I do have one last thing for you, though. Would you have scored 75 without the three-point line?
Oh, no, that was 17 of them.
Oh, yeah?
I don't like to talk about it, but if you ask, I was lucky. My teammates were helping me out. No, it was 17 extra points with a three-point line.
No, that's incredible.
I did come out with about 3 minutes to go, Peter.
I
asked Mr. Bez, take me out. We've done enough. I wasn't a scorer. I said, Coach, we've done enough. Take me out. So I might have, my ball players, a couple guys have found out about it here because of Google and all that crap.
Yeah.
I said, Coach, you had 75? I said, if you were guarding me, I might have been 90. Is what I tell our guys. It might have been 100 if you were guarding me.
And that's the competitive juice that you don't lose, right?
I'm ready. Let's go. Let's go.
Right
I want 32 more minutes against St. Peter's.
Let's go. We're taking them down. We're going to regroup that game up together. Now, it's an incredible feat that stands the test of time. Number one single game scorer in Monsignor Farrell history, Kenny White, now coach. And 75 points is nothing to sneeze at. That is incredible stuff. Three-pointer or no three-pointer, we know this guy can ball, and that's just the truth of it. So, again, thank you so much.
It proves how smart of a coach Mr. Bez was. That proves how smart of a coach our coach was, Mr. Bez. He's more than a dean.
And you're still giving out assists. Even at the end of the podcast, you're still dropping dimes on everybody. That's all we can ask for. That's a great stuff, though. Appreciate you a ton. Anything else? Any last words?
No, but the very, very first basketball coach at Farrell was my godfather, Warren Fenley.
Oh.
He was the very first Staten Islander to play in the NBA, was my godfather. How about that, huh? So I was tied to Farrell. I was tied to Farrell as soon as I was born. And the priest who christened me was Father Gannon, who was a longtime guidance counselor at Farrell. On the altar, the Lady Queen of Peace was Warren Fenley, my godfather, first Boston Celtic team in the NBA. And the priest who baptized me, Father Gannon.
Wow.
So
and he coached.
I owe a lot to Farrell.
I
mean, more than I could
ever. He coached football?
Father Gannon, I think he was a moderator, but he was the guidance counselor for the 80s.
Gotcha.
The Farrell students older than I am were his guidance counselor. When I was at Farrell, he was the pastor of my church, Our Lady Queen of Peace.
Gotcha.
But I am indebted to the men and the women, the teachers at Farrell. I'm indebted to them.
Well, I can't wait for this message that you share with us today, all the messages that you share with us today to be shared to everybody on the Alumni Stories podcast, the first ever episode, and what an amazing guest we had here today. So thank you so much. I know you're still shooting and letting them fly, and you're helping people left and right all you can, and thank you for the help with us for our inaugural episode here. But that's all we got. So signing off for Alumni Stories, the podcast, and for Kenny White, class of 1988, the leading single-game point scorer in Monsignor Farrell history, and head strength coach at Georgetown University Basketball. Signing off, via Fidelis.
Thanks, Peter. Till next time.